So this video is the second part of my look back at the Roger Moore era of the James Bond film series. Also, if you like content like this, please consider subscribing and click that like button. Go on, it's free. With all that out of the way, let's continue with taking a look back at Moore's fifth Bond film. Released in 1981, For Your Eyes Only was directed by John Glenn, who would go on to direct all the Bond films released during the 80s. The plot involves Bond attempting to retrieve the ATAC, an automatic targeting communication system which can order submarines to fire ballistic missiles. During his investigation, Bond gets involved in a bitter rivalry between Greek crime syndicates and Melina Havelock, a young woman who seeks to avenge the murder of her parents. After the enjoyable but outlandish large-scale fantasy of Moonraker, producers realised they had to bring Bond back to basics and return to the relatively gritty realism of the early Connery films and the source novels by Ian Fleming. This is definitely the most grounded and serious film of the Moore era. While there is still plenty of action and humour, there is a sense of things being scaled back here with very few gadgets, and the plot is more complex. In fact, this is a rare case where the true villain of the movie isn't revealed until over an hour into the film. There are actually several villains in For Your Eyes Only. There's Hector Gonzalez, who was the assassin who kills Melina's parents. Emile Locke, who at first appears to be the main villain. Locke is a unique villain in that he never actually speaks a word during the movie. It's never actually mentioned whether he is a mute, but it gives him a very creepy vibe. Then there is Kriegler, a huge KGB assassin. And finally there is Chris Statos, played by Julian Glover. At first Chris Statos appears to be an ally of Bond, until it's revealed that he is in fact the main villain. Glover was in fact a close runner-up to play Bond in the early 70s, until Moore won the role. In my opinion, the producers made the right choice. I think Julian Glover is an excellent actor, but he's much better here as a villain. Clearly Steven Spielberg was a fan, as he cast Glover in a similar role 8 years later in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This movie is a rare case where the pre-title action sequence has absolutely no connection to the main plot. Bond visits the grave of his late wife Tracy, only for someone who suspiciously looks like Ernst Stavro Blofeld try to kill him by taking remote control of the helicopter that Bond is in. For legal reasons too long to go into here, the producers were not able to officially use the character of Ernst Stavro Blofeld or the criminal organisation Spectre due to a long-running legal dispute with filmmaker Kevin McClory. It's pretty clear that it's Blofeld in this scene though, and more than being just a fun way to start the movie, is probably just Albert Broccoli's way of giving the middle finger to McClory. That will come back to haunt him, however. More on that later. By the way, I've always been confused by not Blofeld's begging please to Bond at the end of this sequence.
I'll buy you a delicatessen in stainless steel!
Why does he offer to buy him a delicatessen in stainless steel? What does that even mean? I know what a delicatessen is, but why doesn't he just offer him money? It's really weird. While this is a relatively small-scale film compared to the previous two installments, For Your Eyes Only is actually one of the most action-packed films of the Moore era. There's a terrific car chase in Spain, where Bond and Melina escape Gonzalez's men in an old Citroën 2CV. It's a clever way of subverting expectations, as Bond's gadget-laden Lotus Esprit is blown up before the chase begins. In a way, it's symbolic of the film's back-to-basics approach, and less reliance on gadgets. Bond has to rely more on his wits and experience in this one. There's also a great ski chase in Italy, where Bond is pursued by assassins on motorbikes. This was the second of 3 ski chases that Moore's Bond is involved in during his tenure, and this one is by far my favourite. It's really helped along by Bill Conti's terrific score. There's also a shootout with Locke and his men at a warehouse in Albania, leading to one of the best moments of the Moore era.
You left this with Ferrara, I believe. Had no head for heights.
This was a scene that Moore was reluctant to film as, once again, he felt it was a bit too ruthless for his Bond.
I thought it was, although it's Bond, I thought it was a bit un-Roger Moore Bond to be that vicious, to kick a car over with somebody in.
In this case, I disagree with him. We've grown to hate Locke so much by this point in the story that it's very satisfying when Bond sends Moore over that cliff. Bond is a killer at the end of the day, and he does have a very cruel streak. It also, in my opinion, inspired a very similar scene in No Time to Die.
I had a brother. His name was Felix Leiter.
The movie also features some of the best underwater action in the series, as Bond and Melina are attacked by one of Kristatos' men in a deep-sea diving suit, and another in a killer sub. Carole Bouquet plays the main Bond girl Melina Havelock, and has once again proved that many of the Bond girls of the early films of the series were actually quite strong on a character level. She's one of the deadliest of the Moore era, given that she's an expert with a crossbow. Unfortunately, this film is where Roger Moore was beginning to show his age a little. Moore was in his early 50s at this point, and Carole Bouquet was 23 at the time, meaning that there was 30 years between them. That's quite a significant age gap, and even Moore was becoming more wary of it at the time. It's just as well that Bond shows a lot more maturity here than he did in Moonraker, and actually turns down a woman even younger than Melina at one point.
Don't you like me?
Why, I think you're wonderful, Bibi, but I don't think your Uncle Harry would approve.
Him? He thinks I'm still a virgin.
Yes, well, you get your clothes on, and I'll buy you an ice cream.
T'Pol plays Columbo, who at first appears to be set up as a villain, but actually turns out to be one of Bond's allies. It's a character very reminiscent of Karen Bain from Russia with Love, which was probably the intention. T'Pol actually suggested the pistachios as a trademark of the character, which is used in the warehouse attack scene to orient Columbo's men in where to shoot. In another pullback from the likes of the last two films, there are no massive bases for Bond to infiltrate in this one. The movie climaxes with Bond and Melina teaming up with Columbo's men to infiltrate Kristatos' lair at the top of the mountain. While the stunt work here is impressive, the actual final fight is little more than a scuffle really, and Bond doesn't even get to kill Kristatos. Like I said before, it's a very small scale compared to the last two films, but that was kind of the point. If I have any real criticism of the film, it's the minor subplot of Bond romancing Columbo's mistress, Countess Liesel, played by the late Cassandra Harris, who was Pierce Brosnan's wife at the time. It doesn't really go anywhere and doesn't advance the plot in any meaningful way, except to possibly be a callback to Bond's relationship with Tracy in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. If anything, For Your Eyes Only makes for a great double bill with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, as there are several similarities and callbacks to that film. At least they're more subtle than the ones in No Time to Die.
3 girls, 3 boys. Pleased?
Not bad for a start. But darling, now we have all the time in the world.
Can you go faster?
We don't need to go faster. We have all the time in the world.
Overall, For Your Eyes Only is an excellent Bond film. It's one of my favourites of the Moore era. I think it gets the balance of both serious spy thriller and comedy just about right. For a while though, it was looking likely that it would actually be Moore's final Bond film, but the ongoing legal troubles with Kevin McClory was soon going to come to a head, meaning that the producers would call on Moore to return once again 2 years later. Released in 1983, Octopussy was directed by John Glenn, the second of 5 Bond films he made during the 80s. The plot involves Bond investigating the death of a British agent, which leads him to a Soviet general who is planning to force disarmament in Western Europe by detonating a nuclear weapon. The trail also leads him to conflict with the Afghan prince Kemal Khan and his female associate known only as Octopussy. While Octopussy was in pre-production in 1982, there were plans to replace Roger Moore as James Bond, with several actors tested for the role. These include the likes of Sam Neill, Michael Billington, and American actor James Brolin, who was actually cast and on the verge of being announced to the media. Then all of a sudden, the long-running legal dispute between the Bond producers and Kevin McClory over the film rights to Thunderball came to a head, and a rival James Bond film called Never Say Never Again, starring Sean Connery, was announced to come out the same year as Octopussy. Albert Broccoli, possibly getting cold feet about going up against rival Bond productions starring Sean Connery with an unproven actor in the role, decided to get Roger Moore back to play 007 once again. And so 1983 came to be known as the Battle of the Bonds, with both films coming out within 4 months of each other. After the more serious tone of For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy was a step back into the more outlandish fantasy of The Spy Who Loved Me. There are more gadgets and slapstick humour here than the last film, but at the same time there's a serious Cold War element to the story. The Seymour General Orlov explains his plot to invade the West is especially unsettling, considering the events going on in the world at the time of recording this video. Like For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy has several main villains. Stephen Burkoff plays General Orlov, and it's a very over-the-top performance, but a very enjoyable one.
Must I remind you, the committee, of our overwhelming superiority over NATO forces?
Clearly, Sylvester Stallone was a fan, as he cast Burkov in an almost identical role 2 years later in Rambo First Blood Part 2. Louis Jourdain plays the exiled Afghan prince Kamal Khan, and while on paper he doesn't seem all that interesting, Jourdain plays the role with so much charm that you can't but like him just a little. While at first he appears to be just a henchman for Octopussy, he ends up being the main villain by the end. The scene where he wines and dines Bond while explaining how he's going to torture him is really funny, and may actually have inspired a very similar scene in the following year's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Octopussy is played by Maud Adams. While at first she seems to be set up as a villain, she turns out to be the main Bond girl. After initially wanting a South Asian actress to play the character, the producers went with Maud Adams, despite already having played Andrea in The Man with the Golden Gun, and had helped screen test potential new Bonds. Adams was more mature in age compared to the last two Bond girls, and was possibly cast as she was closer to Moore's age, who is now 56. Like For Your Eyes Only, pre-title sequence is another which has absolutely no connection to the main plot, and is a fun mini-adventure in its own right. Bond is captured while trying to infiltrate an enemy base, but escapes by flying out of a horse's arse. The plot of this movie is one of the most complex of the series. It all starts with a British agent ending up dead who is holding a golden Fabergé egg, which leads Bond to an Afghan prince who is working for a Jew smuggler, who in turn is working for General Orlov, who is trying to explode an atomic bomb on Western soil. It's a very convoluted plot and doesn't make a lot of sense on close examination. I still can't decide if when General Orlov smashes the Fabergé egg, he actually thinks it's a fake. But if it's a fake, why does Khan wince when it happens? Can anyone in the comments explain this for me? Also, after a relatively serious tone for Your Eyes Only, Octopussy takes a step back into Moonraker-style slapstick humour. We have Bond during a Tarzan yell while he's being hunted in the jungle. And the buggy chase is full of sight gags, from a close-up to a camel reacting to the buggy doing wheelie stunts, and a sword fight between Bond and a henchman fighting next to a man on his spiked bed. It's a very strange mix of comedy with the darker Cold War aspects of the story. One of the most often criticised aspects of the film is where Bond dresses up as a gorilla and later a clown during the whole section when he's trying to stop the bomb from exploding. While this sounds ridiculous on paper, I think Moore's performance really sells attention. Despite his appearance, he plays it straight in the minutes lead up to the bomb nearly going off, and the final moments when he disarms it is every bit as suspenseful as the one with the spy who loved me. The final battle at Kamal Khan's palace is a huge improvement on For Your Eyes Only's mountain climax, with Bond leading an army of Octopussy's female soldiers in Khan's palace. It's a nice twist on these kinds of violent battles in Bond films, which are usually very male-driven. Bond's final confrontation with Khan and his henchman Gobinda on top of a plane in mid-air is one of the best of the series, featuring some incredible stunt work. Yeah, they don't make much of an effort to hide the stunt double's face, but who cares when it's this exciting? So overall, Octopussy is a flawed but very enjoyable Bond film. It performed better than the competing Connery-led Bond movie that came out later that year.
Well, you can't win them all.
However, while Albert Broccoli had his eyes on Pierce Brosnan to replace Moore at this point, Brosnan would not be available for a few years yet due to his commitments to the TV series Remington Steele. There was still another Bond film to be made in the meantime, so Moore was brought back for one last mission 2 years later. Released in 1985, A View to a Kill was directed by John Glenn, and was the seventh and final movie to feature Roger Moore as James Bond. The plot involves 007 investigating Max Zorin, a former KGB agent turned industrialist who was planning on destroying Silicon Valley to gain a monopoly in the microchip market. Roger Moore was initially contracted to do a total of 3 Bond films, with every film after The Spy Who Loved Me negotiated on a film-by-film basis. While many believed Octopussy was to be his final appearance in the role, it was a surprise when he was asked back for A View to a Kill. Moore was 57 at the time of filming, and many critics believed that he had aged out of the role. Roger Moore himself admitted later on that he had become too old to be believable as the character.
They start running out of actors old enough to look as though they could be knocked down by Bond. And leading ladies are your mother's age when you started making Bond. Then it's time you move on.
Moore's appearance changed noticeably in the 2 years since Octopussy, and it appeared he underwent some kind of plastic surgery. Moore always had a mole on the left side of his face, but here in A View to a Kill, it's gone. While Moore is known as a likeable and professional actor who got on with most people, Grace Jones, who played Zorn's henchwoman Mayday, was one of the few actors he did not entirely get along with. In his biography, My Word is My Bond, Moore goes into more detail about this, and it's well worth a read. Let's just say that Moore's reaction during his lovemaking scene with Grace Jones in the movie isn't really acting. Christopher Walken plays the main villain Max Zorin, and he's yet another in a long line of great adversaries during the Moore era. The role had initially been offered to the likes of David Bowie and Sting, who all turned it down. But Walken, who had by this time won an Oscar for his performance in The Deer Hunter, took the part and made him one of the craziest Bond villains ever.
Intuitive improvisation is the secret of genius.
This was the first movie I ever saw him walking in, and I've been a big fan of his ever since. This is the Christopher Walken performance that judge all others. The pre-title sequence set in Siberia is the third ski chase of the Moore era, with Bond escaping Soviet forces after recovering a microchip from a deceased 00 agent. It's not one of the best, but features some great stunt work, including a great bit where Bond surfs down a snowbank. However, this was once again a case where inappropriate music was used to score the sequence, as the Beach Boys song California Girls nearly ruins the scene. I don't understand why they felt the need to make the scene funny, as it's an incredible stunt. It would have been even more exciting if they just used good action music. While most of the stunts and fight choreography is of the usual high standard, there is a degree of sloppiness to the way that they are edited. It looks like they've given up on even trying to hide Roger Moore's stunt doubles in some scenes. And the fight scene in Zorn's shipping factory is so poorly edited that in one shot, it looks like a henchman literally lies down on a conveyor belt so that Bond can finish him off. In the fight scene at Stacey Sutton's house, Bond seems to get young very quickly, and again the stunt doubles are obvious. Speaking of Stacey Sutton, she's one of the weakest Bond girls of the Moore era. It's not entirely the actress Tanya Roberts' fault, as she's reduced to a screaming damsel in distress for most of the runtime. She screams for James so many times in this film that I actually wonder how many times she actually does it.
James! Don't leave me! James! James!
Like I said earlier, it doesn't help that there's clearly a massive age gap between her and Bond, over 30 years. And maybe if the writers had acknowledged Moore's age a little in the story and had it be more of a father figure to Stacey, it would have been better. For all the faults of the 1983 unofficial Bond film Never Say Never Again, it at least acknowledged Sean Connery's age and made that part of the story. This was Roger Moore's least favourite Bond film he made, and his age at the time and his working relationship with Grace Jones was just part of it. It's one of the more violent Bond films, and there's one scene in particular where Max Zorin just slaughters a whole ton of people by machine gunning them to death. While I personally like the scene as it shows just how batshit insane Zorin is, and a great example of Christopher Walken acting like a crazy person, Moore was personally disgusted by it. This is also the second Roger Moore Bond film to have the villain's henchman, or henchwoman in this case, switch sides and help Bond in the end. In fairness, since Zorin tried to kill her along with just about everyone else, it's understandable. It sounds like I'm being very negative about A View to a Kill, but there's actually a lot to like about it. There's plenty of action, including a terrific chase through San Francisco with Bond and Stacey being pursued by police cars while driving a fire engine. It has one of the best supporting casts of the Moore era. Patrick Macnee in particular is a standout. He and Moore make a great double act, and I wish he had been in it longer. John Barry's score is one of his best, with one scene in particular where Bond rescues Stacey from a fire being scored like a superhero film. Also, the final fight on the Golden Gate Bridge is fantastic. It's funny, however, that the situation dialogue is almost identical to the climax of Octopussy.
He'll kill us all. Go out and get him. Out there? Go. Go get him. Go!
So overall, A View to a Kill is an enjoyable Bond film, but one of Moore's weakest in my opinion. Moore himself finally decided to retire after this film, but became a great ambassador for the series in the following decades. He always seemed to be proud of his work in the series, regularly popping up in interviews for James Bond documentaries, and always supported the new actors who took over the role. Of course, in real life, Moore did great humanitarian work, becoming a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador in 1991. I highly recommend his biography, My Word is My Bond. It's a great read, very well written, and Moore has great stories to tell about his life, his movies, and his humanitarian work. So finally, if I had to rank the Bond movies of the Roger Moore era in order of best to worst, I would put them in the order of 1. Spy Who Loved Me, 2. For Your Eyes Only, 3. Moonraker, 4. Octopussy, 5. Live and Let Die, 6. A View to a Kill, and 7. The Man with the Golden Gun. And that's it for my look back at the Bond movies of the Roger Moore era. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and be sure to click that notification bell. That way, you'll be notified whenever I upload new content. Also, let me know in the comments what your favourite James Bond movie of the Roger Moore era was. Most importantly, I hope you all look after yourselves, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.